Part 1. The emergency room was already overwhelmed when the single father rushed through its doors, his daughter limp in his arms and his heart racing with fear he refused to show. The harsh white lights reflected off polished floors, nurses calling out vitals, stretchers rolling past, and the constant sound of monitors created a chaos that felt unreal. He had lived his life holding things together alone since his wife passed away years earlier, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. His daughter had collapsed suddenly at home, 1 minute laughing at the kitchen table and the next unable to stand, her breathing shallow and uneven. He remembered the panic that surged through him as he carried her to the car, speaking to her softly even when she could no longer respond. By the time they reached the hospital, her skin had lost its warmth, and every second felt stolen from them. Doctors moved quickly at first, surrounding the bed, attaching wires, placing oxygen, drawing blood, ordering scans. One specialist became 2, then 5, then more, until the room filled with voices layered over one another. Each doctor focused on a different possibility: neurological causes, cardiac issues, infections, allergic reactions. They spoke in clinical tones, using precise language that the father struggled to follow, yet he listened carefully to every word. He stood back as instructed, hands clenched, eyes fixed on his daughter's face, memorizing every small movement or change. Machines beeped steadily, offering numbers but no answers. Time stretched in a way that made minutes feel like hours. As the night deepened, the initial urgency gave way to frustration. Tests came back inconclusive. Scans showed nothing definitive. Blood work revealed abnormalities that pointed in conflicting directions. Doctors gathered in small groups, whispering and reviewing charts, each new theory dismissed almost as quickly as it was suggested. The father noticed a shift in their body language, the way confidence slowly turned into concern. He had learned long ago, raising his daughter alone, that silence often carried more meaning than words. No one said it directly, but he felt it in his chest. They did not know what was wrong. He replayed the hours before her collapse over and over in his mind. He remembered her coming home from school unusually quiet, rubbing her temples, saying food tasted strange. He had asked if she was tired, if she wanted to rest, and she had shrugged it off like any other child eager to avoid worry. He remembered opening the window because she said the air felt heavy. At the time, none of it seemed alarming. Now, every detail felt urgent. Yet as doctor after doctor questioned him, their focus remained narrow. They asked about family medical history, recent illnesses, medications, but no one asked about her day. As the number of doctors grew, so did the sense of helplessness. 22 physicians had now reviewed her case, each bringing expertise and experience, yet none could connect the pieces. The father watched as treatments were tried cautiously, fluids adjusted, medications administered with uncertainty. Her vital signs wavered, dipping and rising unpredictably. Each alarm from the monitor sent a shock through him, though he forced himself to remain outwardly calm. He knew panic would help no one, least of all his daughter. Standing there, he felt the weight of every promise he had made to her since the day her mother died. He had promised to protect her, to listen to her, to be present even when life was hard. That promise echoed now louder than the machines. He realized that while the doctors had knowledge, he had something else. He had context. He had lived beside her every day, noticed her habits, her expressions, the subtle ways she reacted when something was wrong. He began to understand that waiting silently might cost them time they no longer had. As another group of doctors stepped aside to discuss options, their voices low and tense, the father felt a shift inside himself. Fear was still there, heavy and sharp, but beneath it was clarity. He could not afford to be intimidated by titles or overwhelmed by the setting. This was his child. He stepped forward, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. He spoke not as a challenge, but as a parent desperate to be heard. He described her symptoms earlier that day, the metallic taste, the dizziness, the way she had complained about the air at school. He mentioned the brief notice sent home weeks earlier about maintenance work and chemical cleaning in one of the school wings. He admitted he did not know if it mattered, but he knew it had been real. The room felt quiet in a way it had not been all night. Doctors turned toward him, some with surprise, others with sudden focus. Questions followed, specific and urgent now. What kind of smell did she describe? How long did the dizziness last? Did anyone else feel unwell? The father answered everything he could, digging into memory with precision shaped by love. He realized in that moment that being observant was not passive. It was an act of care. That was when the course of the night began to change. Not because the doctors had failed, but because something essential had finally been added. The father stepped back again, returning to his place beside the bed, his role fulfilled for the moment. He watched as tests were reordered and priorities shifted. He did not feel relief yet, only the quiet determination that he had. The Part 2 doctors moved with renewed urgency after hearing the father's account, yet the atmosphere was different from before. This time, there was direction instead of confusion. Orders were given quickly, not overlapping or debated, but aligned toward a new possibility. Blood samples were sent again, this time marked for specialized toxicology screening rather than routine panels. One physician contacted poison control, another reviewed environmental exposure databases, and a third began cross-referencing the symptoms with rare compound reactions. The single father watched all of this quietly, aware that his words had shifted the weight of the night. He did not feel pride or relief yet, only a deeper anxiety, because now everything depended on whether his instinct was right. As the tests were processed, time seemed to stretch painfully. His daughter lay still, her chest rising and falling with mechanical assistance, her face pale beneath the fluorescent lights. He sat beside her, holding her hand, grounding himself in the familiar warmth of her skin. He spoke to her softly, reminding her she was not alone, even though she could not respond. Nurses passed by, occasionally offering brief reassurance, but their eyes reflected concern. The father noticed how carefully they monitored the screens now, how frequently vitals were rechecked. Something serious was unfolding. A senior toxicologist arrived, summoned from another department. She listened intently as the father repeated the details once more, asking clarifying questions that showed she understood the significance of small observations. She explained that certain industrial cleaning agents and laboratory compounds could cause rapid neurological and cardiovascular symptoms while remaining invisible to standard emergency screenings. Exposure levels did not need to be high to be dangerous, especially in children. The father felt a chill as he realized how close they might have been to missing the cause entirely. When preliminary results came back, they confirmed elevated markers consistent with acute chemical toxicity. The compound was rare and unstable, breaking down quickly in the body, which explained why earlier tests had failed to detect it. The room shifted instantly into action. An antidotal treatment protocol was initiated, one that required precise timing and careful monitoring. The doctors worked with focused intensity, communicating clearly and efficiently. There were no more debates, only execution. As the medication was administered, the father watched every movement, every reaction on his daughter's face. Minutes passed with no visible change, and doubt crept in. He questioned himself silently, wondering if he had led them in the wrong direction. But then a nurse noticed a slight improvement in oxygen saturation. Another pointed out that her heart rate, previously erratic, was beginning to stabilize. The changes were subtle, almost invisible to anyone not watching closely, but they were real. Over the next hour, those small improvements accumulated. Her breathing became less labored, the tension in her body eased, and the alarms that had punctuated the night grew quieter. Doctors exchanged brief nods, cautious but hopeful. No one celebrated yet. They all knew how fragile the situation still was. The father remained still, afraid to move, afraid to disturb whatever balance had been achieved. Exhaustion pressed down on him, but he refused to sit back or look away. One of the doctors approached him quietly and explained the situation in plain terms. The exposure had caused a chain reaction in her system that mimicked several other conditions, making diagnosis extremely difficult. Without targeted treatment, the outcome could have been severe. The doctor paused, then acknowledged that without the father's detailed observation, the correct diagnosis might not have been reached in time. The words landed heavily, not as praise, but as confirmation of how narrow the margin had been. As dawn approached, the emergency room began to change. The constant rush of the night slowed slightly, replaced by early morning staff and softer light filtering through high windows. His daughter was no longer classified as critical, though she remained under close observation. The father finally allowed himself to sit back, his body aching from hours of tension. He realized how close he had come to losing her without ever understanding why. In that quiet moment, he reflected on the nature of expertise. The doctors had knowledge, training, and experience that saved lives every day. But knowledge alone had not been enough. It was the combination of medical skill and lived awareness that turned the situation around. He understood then that being a parent was not separate from being part of the care team. His role had never been passive. As his daughter stirred slightly, squeezing his finger almost imperceptibly, emotion finally broke through the control he had maintained all night. Tears came silently, not from fear anymore, but from gratitude and release. The impossible had begun to reverse, not through defiance or luck, but through attention, courage, and the willingness to speak when it mattered most. Part 3 Recovery did not happen all at once. It unfolded slowly, measured in small signs that only those watching closely would notice. The first was her breathing, no longer shallow or forced, but steady enough that the ventilatory support could be reduced. Then came the color returning to her face, faint at first, like dawn breaking through darkness. The single father stayed by her side through it all, barely leaving the room except when nurses insisted he eat or rest. Even then, he hovered nearby, afraid that distance might undo the fragile progress she had made. Each improvement felt unreal, as if hope itself needed permission to exist after such a long night. Doctors rotated in and out, some from the original group of 22, others new to the case. Their tone had changed completely. Where there had once been uncertainty, there was now careful confidence. They explained that the antidotal treatment had interrupted the toxic chain reaction in her system, allowing her organs to begin stabilizing. Still, they warned that neurological effects could take time to assess. The father listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions, absorbing information not out of fear, but responsibility. He understood now how critical understanding was, not just trust. When his daughter finally opened her eyes, it was brief and unfocused, but it was enough to bring the room to a standstill. She did not speak, but she recognized him. Her fingers tightened weakly around his hand, and that simple gesture carried more meaning than words ever could. The father leaned closer, whispering reassurance, telling her she was safe, that she had been brave. He did not mention the danger or the fear. He spoke only of being together, of getting through it one step at a time. As the hours passed, the doctors conducted follow-up tests, monitoring cognitive responses and motor function. Each test brought tension, but also relief as results came back better than expected. The exposure had been severe, but the timely intervention had prevented irreversible damage. One physician explained that minutes had mattered more than anyone realized. The father felt the weight of that truth settle deep inside him. If he had stayed silent, if he had doubted himself, the story might have ended very differently. Nurses treated him with quiet respect now. They updated him regularly, included him in discussions, and listened when he shared observations about his daughter's behavior. He noticed how the dynamic had shifted. He was no longer just a worried parent standing aside. He was a partner in care. That role was not something he had asked for, but it was one he had earned through presence and clarity. As his daughter became more alert, she began to ask simple questions, confused but calm. She wanted to know where she was and why her head hurt. The father answered honestly but gently, careful not to overwhelm her. He explained that she had been very sick, that the doctors were helping her heal, and that she was safe. She nodded, trusting him completely, and closed her eyes again. That trust humbled him more than any praise ever could. Later, a senior doctor sat down with him privately. She explained the rarity of the case and how easily it could have gone undiagnosed. Emergency medicine relied on patterns, she said, and sometimes the most dangerous cases were the ones that did not fit neatly into those patterns. She acknowledged that while 22 doctors had applied their expertise, it was the father's lived knowledge that completed the picture. Her words were not an apology, but a recognition. The system had limits, and awareness had bridged them, The father did not feel anger toward the doctors who had struggled. He felt understanding. He knew what it meant to carry responsibility under pressure, to make decisions with incomplete information. He also knew that fear could silence people who should speak. That night had taught him that advocacy was not confrontation. It was collaboration. When his daughter was finally moved out of the emergency unit and into a recovery room, the noise and urgency faded. The room was quieter, softer, filled with daylight instead of artificial glare. The father sat beside her bed, exhaustion finally overtaking him. His body ached, his eyes burned, but his heart felt lighter than it had in hours. He watched her sleep, breathing evenly, and allowed himself to believe that the worst had passed out. In the days that followed, recovery continued steadily. Physical weakness lingered, and follow-up care was planned, but her spirit returned quickly. She smiled again, asked for her favorite food, complained about boredom. Each ordinary behavior felt extraordinary. The father stayed close, grateful for every moment that had nearly been taken from them. Looking back, he understood that the night had changed him too. It reinforced a lesson he would carry forever. Being present, observant, and willing to speak could alter outcomes, even in places defined by expertise. Love, when paired with attention, had power. Not to replace knowledge, but to complete it. The aftermath of the emergency did not end when his daughter was discharged from the hospital. In many ways, that was when the deeper impact began to surface. Returning home felt different, as if the walls carried memory. The father noticed how quiet the house seemed without the constant beeping of monitors, how ordinary sounds felt louder and more precious. He adjusted his routine carefully, watching his daughter with an attentiveness shaped by what they had survived. He followed medical instructions precisely, scheduled follow-up appointments, and documented every small symptom, no matter how insignificant it seemed. He had learned that details mattered. His daughter's recovery continued steadily, though fatigue and sensitivity lingered. Some days she felt strong enough to laugh and move freely, while other days she needed rest and reassurance. The father balanced encouragement with patience, never pushing her beyond what she could handle. He explained things honestly, helping her understand her body without frightening her. Through it all, he became more aware of how deeply trust defined their relationship. She relied on him not just for care, but for calm, and he understood that his steadiness shaped her sense of safety. The hospital followed up with the school and local authorities, investigating the exposure that had caused the emergency. Reports were filed, safety measures reviewed, and protocols revised. The father was invited to share his experience during a review meeting. Sitting in a room filled with professionals, he spoke clearly and without blame. He described the symptoms he had observed, the questions that had not been asked, and the moment he realized his voice mattered. His account contributed to updated guidelines on environmental exposure awareness in pediatric emergencies. He did not seek recognition, but he understood that speaking could prevent another family from facing the same uncertainty. The experience also reshaped his relationship with fear. Before that night, fear had often lived quietly in the background of his life, shaped by the loss of his wife and the responsibility of raising a child alone. Afterward, fear became something he acknowledged rather than avoided. He recognized that fear did not always signal weakness. Sometimes it signaled attention. Learning to listen to it without letting it dominate became part of his growth as a parent. Doctors from the emergency room checked in periodically, following his daughter's progress with professional interest and personal relief. Some expressed gratitude for the reminder that medicine functioned best when families were included, not sidelined. The father appreciated their honesty. He never viewed the night as a failure of medicine, but as a demonstration of how complex reality could be. Expertise saved his daughter, but awareness had guided it. As time passed, life gradually returned to normal rhythms. School resumed with accommodations, routines stabilized, and laughter returned to their home. Yet something fundamental had changed. The father no longer doubted his instincts when it came to his child. He understood that his role extended beyond providing shelter and support. He was an advocate, a witness, and a voice when clarity was needed most. His daughter, too, carried the experience quietly. She became more attentive to her own body, more willing to speak up when something felt wrong. The father encouraged this awareness, teaching her that asking questions was a strength, not a burden. Together, they transformed a moment of crisis into a foundation for resilience. Looking back, the night in the emergency room stood as a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. Yet it also revealed something powerful. Even in a room filled with 22 experts, one voice grounded in love and attention had shifted the outcome. The impossible had not been turned around by heroics or defiance, but by presence, courage, and a refusal to remain silent. That lesson stayed with him long after the memory of fear faded. In ordinary moments, he remembered that extraordinary outcomes often begin with noticing what others miss. And in that awareness, he found confidence, gratitude, and a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to be a father.